All right, if there are none, I'll open it up to the public to see if the public has any comments or corrections to the record of action. All right, seeing none, can we get a motion to approve May 19th's record of action?
So moved.
Thank you, Cheryl. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. I think that was Michael, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Christina, can we do a roll call vote?
Yes, absolutely. And would you like me to share the agenda as well? Would that be helpful?
You don't have to
Okay.
at the moment. Thank you, though.
Okay, of course. Louis, it's not here. Kira,
Aye.
Ellen, D.A. Becton, Tamisha Walker,
Yes.
Michael,
Aye.
Cheryl,
Yes, ma'am.
and Stephanie.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. Our next agenda item is a discussion on the eligibility criteria update. And this is the draft of the list of offenses to be excluded from diversion eligibility that Michael worked on, Simon, and I believe Ellen and Tamisha also worked on. And so this is not a final draft, but this is something that is up for discussion for the committee to talk about and see if there's anything that we think needs to be changed from this list. And actually, Christina, maybe you can bring that up now so everyone can see it.
Absolutely. Just one moment here. Get my screens together. Stephanie, I think you're on mute still.
I was, thank you. Michael or Tamisha, since you all were involved in those conversations, do you want to give a quick kind of background of how you all came up with these offenses and just some of the thinking around that?
Sure. This was a, I guess, effort from, I guess, both sides of the fence, from, I guess, from the DA's standpoint, and also from, you know, more of a criminal defense or community standpoint. We kind of went back and forth on some of them. I think most of them we kind of agreed on. And we just, you know, we made some changes to the initial list that was proposed in the beginning. And I think we had a couple meetings going back and forth about each thing. And I think this list was to the point where we thought it was sufficient to present to the general body for comment, or for us to kind of go through these individual offenses if there were, you know, some more discussion that we needed to have over this. But I think we were kind of comfortable with this, and I would say most of these things are typically more of the serious offenses that are charged, versus, you know, things like, you know, like embezzlement. If you look, you see embezzlement was on there initially. But you see identity theft is on there. We did embezzlement from the standpoint of, you know, an embezzlement charge can be from writing a bad check. You know, you could, you know, it might not be the same thing as an intentional act, such as identity theft, where you're actually getting someone's identity and you're actually perpetrating a crime upon that person, versus embezzlement, which could be innocent or could not be. And this would just be the list that would exclude people, but the other ones were things that would need to go to well, we haven't got to that point yet, but to the decision makers. So It would be for a vote for people who would, you know, to see the specific charge that someone's being charged with. So that's kind of the thinking. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on now, but that's kind of the thinking of what we did. And I do open it for comment that if there's questions or comments, I think we really should discuss this. I think it's that important.
Thanks, Michael, for your summary. Tamisha, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Just to jumpstart my memory, this was the list of offenses that would not be qualifying for diversion, right?
Correct.
Yeah, no, I don't have I don't have anything. I don't have anything to say about this particular list. I mean, I could push back more on each one, just going and, you know, thinking about, you know, mitigating factors and everything like that. But I'm assuming we leave that up to the judicial system that we hope functions well for our folks. So I don't have much to say.
Okay, thank you. We'll open it up now for committee members to discuss.
I would say if Tamisha has reservations on any particular one, that, you know, this will be a great time for us to kind of address this before we take this any further. You know, I think any and all input is great for something like this. And this was kind of a give and take, you know, I think from the people standpoint versus, I guess, you know, some of the community standpoint, well, partial community standpoint. So I think that this would be the forum to kind of address. I mean, we can nitpick every single one of them and just say everything should be, you know, go into a committee and we'll make a decision, or a decision will be made. But I think we do have to have some kind of baseline.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're here for, to discuss it. So, Michael, you know, one of the things, was this specifically just looking at for adults, or did you all have young people in mind as well?
I don't think we ever had a discussion of juveniles. I think this was all for adult related offenses because, yeah, absolutely, because I would definitely have a whole different view on diversion for someone who's juvenile. I would definitely have a completely different position on that.
Okay, yeah, because I think that was one of the things that I was thinking about, and I don't know if we ever actually talked about, were we looking at this from both perspectives, or this was just for adults?
Yeah, and again, I believe from my perspective, we never brought it up, but I wouldn't think this would apply to juvenile. I think that would be something else that we would kind of have to start all over again with, or address this from a standpoint of diversion for juveniles. Or someone who had a juvenile offense, one of these offenses as a juvenile. I think my position would also change on some of these. We would have to take another look at this list for someone who may have had a, you know, even start off with a firearm offense as a juvenile, and now we're talking about adult diversion. You know, I would probably have a different position on that.
So I'm still not understanding, and I think we talked about this the last time. I'm still not understanding the forgery other than financial instrument, identity theft, embezzlement, right? I heard what you say and how you're trying to make the distinction between you know, the plausibility, the intention, etc. There's an intention behind embezzlement. There's an intention behind it. Now, okay, I understand there may have been an accident, but there's been a few cases lately, more than a few, of somebody stealing from a school, PTA, and moving it into their own accounts, adults, and we're talking, and since we're only talking about adults, and I do think it's very important that we keep the adults and juveniles or young people, not necessarily juvenile, but young people, young adults and young people separate. But why are we saying other than financial instruments? Because you can totally ruin someone's life with the financial instrument. And what I've heard, especially since this last year, is that older adults have a huge issue with this right now, with people going into the county clerk's office, taking their information and stealing their homes and taking their not just regular identity theft, but taking their homes. And that does use a financial instrument, getting second mortgages, getting loans and things like that. So I'm trying to find out what is this distinction we're trying to make here?
Yeah, this one was more of a Simon's argument on the forgery. I think you probably need to address Simon. He could probably give a better answer than I could about the distinction. But a lot of times when you're charged with something, it's a sliding scale of what the penalty is. You know, there is a sliding scale of what the penalty is, and there's different levels to even these charges. There's a misdemeanor version of some of these charges, and there's a felony version of some of these charges. So it just kind of depends the circumstances, and they each break down. So I can't recall specifically the forgery, other than the financial instrument. That would definitely be something we would need to address with Simon. But I remember that he did make an argument. I think I was okay with it, but we may need to circle that one and highlight that one.
Let me tell you why I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with it because one of the reasons we're here is because it is the racial justice oversight body. And many times forgeries, especially when it comes to the level that I'm talking about, a lot of Black and brown people are less affected by that than they are. These young Black and brown people get more time in jail for some of these other offenses and carry more time for something like a first offense with a firearm or first offense with a burglary, than people who steal millions of dollars or people who steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in an identity theft case with this so-called sliding scale. So I'm not okay with it. And if you've ever had your identity stolen, which I have a long time ago, but still, it takes years to fix that problem. So I'm not okay with it.
And that's why that's on the list, that if you
No, but going back to forgery other than financial instrument, people can do that with a bank account, which is a financial instrument. So I'm just trying to figure out this whole thing. We're trying to make a difference with this white collar crime versus other things like assault and battery or firearm, or things that so-called people think it's a so-called violent offense versus these paper offenses. I take offense for it. We have young people right now serving these monster multi-decade sentences for something that's a subjective, this so-called sliding scale, where I think it's just as harmful to steal from elderly people, and we keep hearing this in our communities. Stealing people's homes or stealing people's life savings is just as harmful. So I don't want to hear that we have some sliding scale. Most of the time is because the people committing these crimes don't look like these children who may have these firearms or whatever. So no, I'm not gonna agree with this.
When I refer to sliding scale, I mean that
I know what you're
based on the amount that things are, just like a shoplifting, above $800 to $950, that's different than stealing $50 worth of stuff. That puts you into a different category.
But if I steal $950,
that's what I'm referring to so far as
I know.
a sliding scale. There's just different penalties for different conduct.
I know it is, but if I go in the store every day of the week and steal $950, if I go into 10 stores for one day and steal $950, or if I write a check $950 from 10 different people, do I deserve to be let off with diversion than a child who was caught on a first offense with a firearm?
So are you saying that forgery, no matter what forgery is, should be just on the list, period? So the financial instruments should be taken off? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that if you,
I want us to
I
be
am.
productive and not just criticize. Let's be
I am.
productive and get somewhere.
I'm saying I want to know the reason behind it. If you stole some elder person's check, or if you wrote something on a financial instrument such as you and took out a home loan on somebody else, on somebody's property, which is a financial instrument, why should you be eligible for diversion? If a 17-year-old or 19-year-old on their first offense with a firearm or whatever is not eligible. That's what I want to know. That home could be worth $500,000. And you just wrote a home loan against it, which is a financial instrument. So why should you be let off if we're not letting a 19-year-old off on their first offense with a firearm?
If I can just interject here real quick, I think, and Cheryl, maybe I'm mishearing you, but the way I read this ineligible list is that forgery is included as possibly being eligible unless a financial instrument was used. So I guess my question to you is forgery off the table for you altogether, that it should be removed from this list, or should be, be included in this list in its entirety? Or do you want to maintain that it's possible for decision makers to determine it unless a financial instrument was used?
I wanted to understand the rationale why we were including it at all, forgery and identity theft. Yeah, I want to know why it's included there. What's the rationale for including it there? Because this is supposed to be an exclusionary list, right?
Right.
Well,
And I agree with Michael in that, based on my knowledge of misdemeanors and felonies and whatnot, I understand what he's saying by sliding scale, because, like with, you see there on there's the 459 shoplifting. It used to be Penal Code 488. They've changed it over time when the laws shifted. So even with the shoplifting, like you said, if you steal up to 900, that could be a misdemeanor. So should we exclude that, or should we include that? I guess that would be something that we could mark in yellow and decide, because to me, that's still thievery. You're still thieving. You're still stealing, just like you would with forgery. It is an offense of moral turpitude. And that's where I go with those two items. And maybe that's where you go with the forgery, which brings you to your conclusion as to why we're including it, because it's intentional, as you said. So I think what would be a good idea, Michael and Cheryl, is maybe just highlight that one as you suggested, and either have further discussion on it. Maybe we could do a little more research on the code itself, which is 470 and then some, to get to the bottom of it. What do you think?
I mean, Kara, I think that's a good idea. And I think, Cheryl, because from what I'm understanding, your main thing is like, why is this other than financial instrument included in it?
Yes.
Correct. And
Yes.
so it could be just removing that word and just having it be forgery, period. Is that what you're
Yes.
advocating for?
I want the rationale. Thank you.
So yeah, if we could just kind of make a notation by that, and also kind of hear what Simon's rationale for that was, I think would be helpful in furthering that conversation and figuring out, is this, basically, does the wording need to be changed?
And I agree with you so far as forgery, taking away people with elders, that's 50% of my legal practice is defending these victims, these people who are taken advantage of. So I'm not okay with that. So if that's what you're talking about, I don't think that's what was the intent of what was written on there. because it's the same thing as identity theft. It's not the same, but it's very close to identity theft, where it takes people years to recover from that. And just before we got on this call, I just spent 2 hours on this exact same thing that you're talking about, where my client has been scammed by all these people because she may have dementia or she's elderly. So I do think that there is that's not the kind of conduct we would be allowing to be on this list of eligibility. So that's not something, I can't recall why it's specifically, other than financial instruments were written on there. I don't recall that part.
Tamisha.
Yeah, I guess I definitely don't want us to stay stuck here, because there are, you know, people stuck in legal proceedings and in jails because some of this stuff should have been diverted. But I guess I will say that, you know, I hope we can move forward and not become a part of the problem that we're trying to fix here. Because a lot of what I'm hearing is concerning me as a formerly incarcerated person who works with other folks who have had some of these offenses and are now up for a second chance and doing well in their lives. I also want to highlight, I'm not here for that. And that, you know, there are folks who rob our communities for resources every day, and they're not convicted of a crime, and we are still spending years recovering right now. And to be very clear, that most of us don't have a home in Hawaii to go to on house arrest after we embezzle and misappropriate funds. So we're talking about different populations of folks. And like, again, just want to reiterate, what are the mitigating factors in all of these that will put a person in a position to be diverted rather than criminalized and incarcerated is always my mission.
Thank you, Tamisha. You know, I do have a question. Are there any particular ones, though, that you feel adamantly that they need to be taken off of this list so that they can be diverted?
It just feels like to me that they should be on this list and the diverted list. I mean, I'm just thinking to myself about mitigating factors, other circumstances that arise in people's lives that need to be considered when charging them with any crime. And so I'm not saying to eliminate it from this list, add it to the other list or whatever. I'm trying to understand what would drive either one of these to a level of diversion based on mitigating factors and individual cases. That's my question.
For instance, you have animal cruelty offense here. If your animal gets loose for whatever reason, and your dog bites someone, you can be charged with animal cruelty. For whatever reason, I don't know. There's different levels of.
You cannot. He specifically is PC 597. That's not just your dog running loose. That's not what it is.
I didn't say running loose. Didn't know what I say. If that animal kills another animal,
maliciously killing, harming, maiming, or torturing an animal,
or it hurts another animal.
That's what no, the 597 is defined as maliciously killing, harming, maiming, or torturing an animal. So that's a little different.
Even then, I don't know. And I'm an animal rights person. I'm a vegan for a reason. I don't even eat animals, never let harm one. I just have a different level of what animal cruelty is, because I think people who eat animals might be cruel to animals. So
I would suggest you look at what 597 is. It's talking about 597 in particular.
I know what 597. I'm just telling you that I know
it.
What I'm telling you is that I know people who look at this, at animal cruelty, from a different lens, even from even if for what you just said from that lens. So what Tamisha just told you and what I'm telling you is that there's some things that you can twist any way you want to, right? Any way you want to. So the circumstances in people's lives should be looked at. And I don't know. I just feel like we use incarceration way too much, way too much. There's different things that are on this list that's a no-brainer for me. Sexual offense, physical sexual assault of a child, elder abuse. Some of these things, I'm not even gonna talk to you about. Some things, I think we just use the carceral system just is a punishment system.
It feels like you're just criticizing versus being constructive at this point. I mean, you're pointing
Michael,
at
that's
things
what
that I
we're
don't know if
doing.
you've done the research on what we're talking about here. If there's a particular thing, if you're talking about 597, let's look at the code to see what the law is for 597 and talk about it. This ain't just run of the mill, you left your dog outside and now it's hot and now all of a sudden you're charged with PC 597. That's not what that is. That's a specific kind of conduct. So a lot of these were specific kinds of conduct because everything you just said, any charge on here, I guarantee you, I probably had a case where one of these, I represented somebody and we can mitigate one of these things because the circumstances was different. Even
Okay,
sexual
then take it
assault,
off.
even sexual assault. But if that's the case, then what's the criteria? So we should just let everybody qualify for diversion?
Is that what I said?
I think one of the things though that we need to look at, because I definitely agree that there are mitigating circumstances to different situations. But I also think this is two separate conversations. There's like looking at, okay, well, what's eligible for diversion? And then there's also going to be circumstances where it may not qualify for diversion, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be some type of support given where that person doesn't necessarily go into the system.
Yes.
I don't think that necessarily means that, yeah, and I like I said, I think it's two different conversations. Because we do have to have some type of kind of guideposts or guidance as to what inexplicably is going to go towards diversion. And then there's another conversation. And I feel like we're saying the same things, but just in some different ways.
I'll agree with you. I'll agree with that, but I also agree that with that just because someone doesn't agree doesn't mean they're being critical. But at the same time, I'm allowed to be critical, sir. We're allowed to be critical. We don't have to always agree. This is what this is for. We're allowed to be critical, and we're allowed to also have different opinions. Miss Jill has her hand up, Miss Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Jill.
Yeah. So listening to this conversation, I'm just wondering if it might be a good idea, and if there's a way to look at who is charged with these crimes in our system. So in other words, if this is through a racial justice lens, what is the race of people who are charged with that animal cruelty, which I understand there's, that's sort of a sign of something else too, usually. What is the racial makeup of those people who are charged with those crimes, and sort of narrow it down? Because like you said, any crime can be used in various ways. And so to kind of narrow that down to, if there's an overabundance of African Americans who are being charged with animal cruelty versus the population, then maybe that's something to really look at. And then the other part of that is sort of a footnote, an asterisk, and I know we've done this in other programs of, these things can be reviewed by the people who are doing the reviewing of these offenses. And if they feel there's extenuating circumstances that would, allow one of these people to successfully go to a diversion program, then that could be considered, waiving these requirements. But that'll stop talking.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, and that's exactly correct. Any other committee members before we open it up for public comment also? Okay, I'll open it up for public comment.
This is
You can
Emily.
go.
I just wanted to give some public comment. I'm happy to be here. First, I don't know whether or not my comment in chat was seen at the beginning of the meeting that was off topic what we're talking about now, which I also have public comment about, but I just was curious about the efforts that are being made to actually get the public here to these meetings to be able to provide public comments. Because I've been attending these subcommittee meetings now for over a year, and I'm often the only member of the public in this space. So just wanted to put that out there. But secondly, I just had a lot of responses to what people have been saying, because my concern, and I was not able to make the last meeting when this list was first looked at. I was teaching at that time, but I watched it on YouTube and I provided some written comment via email. But I just look at this list and it just makes me concerned about perpetuating racial bias looking at this list, because as a mother of a young mixed race man in a Contra Costa jail right now who has a very large friend group and of many different racial identities, I'm just very aware of how Tay individuals are extremely impressionable and how, what the mistakes that they make are oftentimes mistakes that same race individuals are making. And so I know that like firearms, for instance, I think if we cross-reference this list, like Jill was suggesting, with the individuals who are actually behind bars right now because of these offenses, my bet is that we would see some demographic information that would help us understand that some of these, if some of these items are left on this list, we're actually perpetuating the bias. And for instance, like any firearm offenses on this list, and I appreciate what Michael was saying about how his opinion would be different were this to be the list that would apply to youth. But I also want to say that unfortunately, Tay individuals are considered adults. So yes, I'm happy that we are thinking that we need to renegotiate this list when thinking about children. But also I'm keeping in mind and in my heart the Tay individuals who are being treated like adults with the brains of the children and still very impressionable from their peers. But for instance, any firearm offenses, it can be a broken firearm, it can be an empty gun, and they're still being charged with firearm offenses. So like what Tamisha was saying, I bet there are many more Black and brown kids behind bars, Tay youth behind bars because of those charges rather than white kids. So I am also all in support of Jill's idea. And also the idea of the mitigating circumstances. I don't think that we are saying that like we're creating this diversion list and anyone who's committed these crimes immediately is diverted. I think probably mitigating circumstances are taken into consideration there too. So I think that this list of prohibitions for diversion, I think mitigating circumstances should be taken in consideration. And I believe those are all my public comments. I'm sorry, they're a bit scrambled. I've been trying to hold them in my head as I was listening to you all talk. I really wish there was some way that we could treat our Tay community members the same way that we're treating youth in Contra Costa and hold them to a different level of accountability. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else from the public? Any more from the committee? So in thinking about next steps, and given some of the conversation that we've had and suggestions that we had, a couple of things are coming to my mind, and please chime in if I missed something or if you all think that we need to be thinking about this for something else around next steps. But one is, this is adult only, and making it clear that this is an adult only list. There needs to be another list that we're looking at for young people that are involved in the system. Also, with this particular list, we need to be thinking about what are some of those mitigating circumstances that could possibly mean that someone is diverted, and making that explicit when we make these recommendations, if that's the way we decide to go. And then also figuring out, I think working with the data committee, they may have already gotten some of this information. I have no idea, but checking on if we can cross-reference demographics with this particular list so we can see what racial ethnic disparities there may be. How do folks feel about that as far as next steps? Yes, no, maybe. Thank you, I see a few thumbs. Any other suggestions that folks want to put out there? Okay, all right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate all of this discussion that was had on this topic. I know Michael and Tamisha, I don't think you all have talked about like having another meeting after this, but once Chris is back, I'll connect with him and we can talk about like some of those next steps and maybe how we want to reconnect that subgroup, work group. Yes, sure.
So Stephanie, so just to confirm, so because I go to the data subcommittee meetings, and yeah, we do have a lot of the information that Ms. Jill was talking about, and I think that it would enlighten a lot of this committee specifically to look at that information. They've provided it. They've provided it at our larger, RJLB meetings, and it's posted on the data site, and it will give the insight, the same insight that we've been talking about right here, as to the disparities and the gaps for the Black and Brown people who are in the system, people who've touched the system, and it's there. So this is not anecdotal, it's not, suppositions. It is the actual disparities in countywide and by city that we've seen. So I'm not speaking opinion-wise, I'm telling you what we're seeing, what we saw in task force-wise years ago, and what we're seeing up until the last data was provided. I believe the last one was 2019-2020 round. So this is what we've seen in these disparities in most of these categories that we have up here. So I think it would behoove us to look at that information and moving forward with the second set for the youth and juvenile and young adult as well. But I do think we need to look at the data.
Thank you, Cheryl. All right, any more comments before we move on? Okay, thank you. The next agenda topic is discuss a work plan for objective number 5 around the school discipline. And I know we've talked about what this looks like across the county, and this is trying to figure out what can possibly be done across the county. But we have been doing some work with West County. And so kind of thinking about starting with them, just starting, not stopping with them, but starting with them around possibly finding out a little bit more information and how we can support and create more intervention prevention supports for that particular school district. And then how does that get pushed out to other districts as well? We don't really have that much to talk about around that. But I at least wanted to put it out there to see if anything has come up for people that maybe we haven't talked about around this topic and that we need to be talking about, or if there are any other folks that we need to reach out to, especially around in East County, Central County, around this particular topic. So I'll open it up for the committee for any conversation around this. Nothing. One of the things I think could be good, and maybe someone has some suggestions. We've been struggling trying to figure out how do we get some contacts in East County, and it would be good to hear if anyone on the committee or from the public has any suggestions on how we could get some type of contact with folks in East County districts or Central County.
Stephanie, what are you looking? What are you looking to contact, or who? What and for what? Because my office is in Antioch, so we've been working with a lot of East County CBOs quite a bit.
Yes. So this is specifically around our objective 5 in our work plan, and it was around school discipline, school to prison pipeline, and what that connection looks like, and looking at what are their intervention prevention services that we maybe need to push for in our recommendations.
Well, they have a lot of different districts in East County. So it'd be having to contact each one of them, I think. So my thought is just to start with CCCOE and then take it from there, because I know that I don't know the details, and Becky just mentioned it in passing in a meeting I was in yesterday, which, by the way, she's moving on. So
really?
Yeah, she's going to be a elementary school principal. So her time at the COE is short. But they are starting some sort of pilot program of some kind in the Antioch Unified School District. I don't know when that's going to start. And again, I don't know many details, but they just determined that Antioch has the greater need at this point. So that's where, kind of like you just said with West, we're going to start there and then kind of see what so that might be something to look into. I know Bay Point is also, at least in talking with the sheriff's office last week, I know that they are really looking for some additional assistance in Bay Point, particularly at the elementary middle school level, which is really the schools that they house there. But so it might be a good idea to kind of look into them as well, since they're such a small community and kind of not really in compared to some of our other cities like Pittsburgh or Concord, the ones that surround them, I guess. So I have a deputy that just started this week, and we're going to actually have him be sort of a school liaison rather than assigned to a single school, since we don't really sit on school sites anymore. So I can maybe, once he kind of gets his feet wet with his daily duties, maybe we can sort of engage him in meeting with the various school districts, because that's going to be one of his responsibilities ultimately.
Okay. Kara, why don't we do this? I can connect with you so I can get a little bit more information too, and I'll connect with Becky so I can find out a little more information of what they're doing. Because we have a relationship with West County, but nobody in other parts of the county. So it's been really hard trying to figure out how do we actually get those connections. So I can connect with you all offline, and Chris will probably at some point want to connect and figure out kind of like a path forward and like how exactly we want to bring it back to this group so we can figure out how we want to move.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Anyone else from the committee?
There's a program in Freedom High School. They have a, I don't know if I think I put it on that sheet we were working on before, but they have a program up here, kind of discipline program where
That's Antioch, Michael?
it's in Oakley.
Okay.
Yes, Oakley. But they have a program where when there's a discipline issue comes up, they do like this peer review panel where the students themselves kind of try to resolve the conflict or deal with things. But there is a lot of, racial disparity in the punishment out here. I have kids in 4 different schools out here. So I have from elementary to high school, and a couple schools I'm at quite a bit with issues of how things are kind of disciplined and just kind of the interaction and the lack of policies in place. And they're just now starting to institute, I know at least 2 of the schools out here, they're starting to institute a little diversity training with the teachers. There are a lot of teachers who have been here who have never dealt with very diverse, classrooms and a lot of issues and offline I can tell you some more detailed stories of some of the things going on here. But I think that program with Freedom High School is a good pilot of something to look at, just kind of how the peers kind of get together and resolve conflict and discipline. And I don't know how it seems to be that no one's talking to anyone with these schools. And again, I have kids in 4 different schools out here. So no one's talking to anyone. One principal is not talking to this principal. Like there's no consistency there. So I don't know if we need to take a step up and try to approach this from a district standpoint, maybe deal with district policies versus, the individual schools, because it looked like every school out here is completely run, completely different.
Yeah, that's for sure an option.
And there's such a disparity in punishment with African-American kids in some of these schools out here. Ridiculous.
Michael, from your end, would you be able to get a contact at Freedom Schools?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Patrice.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I echo Kara's suggestion, certainly connecting with Becky, because I believe that in a few of the LCAPs for the districts in East County, some of them may actually have metric goals related to school discipline because they have already identified it as an issue or challenge, particularly if there are higher numbers of suspensions or expulsions among certain student groups. So she may even be able to pull that information, or at least at a cursory view, because the County Office of Ed kind of plays the accountability role for school districts around their local control accountability planning, or the LCAPs. So she may be able to identify which districts are actually paying attention to it, in Central and East County, and if they're making any plans or allocating any resources to address that issue.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. I'll open it up for public comment. All right, seeing none, are there any other comments from the committee or public before we move on? So for this particular topic, I'm glad, I feel like there's a little bit of traction that can happen with getting more information about East County, because I do feel like we don't know what's happening out there. And so I think if we can get some of this information, that could be very helpful to really figure out like, how do we kind of create a pathway forward. So I have my to-dos of who I need to talk to. Michael, you'll be getting us some information, a contact at Freedom Schools, and I'll connect with Becky as well. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, next steps. We've already kind of talked about that. And we do have some, I think, some solid next steps for the diversion criteria. Are there any other next steps that folks want to add on or make sure that we're looking at? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you for taking the time out and being here today. It was a little bit of a rough start, but thank you for taking that time out and being involved in this very important topic. We'll go ahead and adjourn at 2:06.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.